guy behind the scenes and made sure it actually got done.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
he was a chief of prosecution.
Yeah.
So-
So it wasn't for you folks, Charles Taylor would still be slaughtering
He'd
people.
still be,
Yeah.
yes, he'd still be wreaking havoc.
Yeah.
There's no question about it.
This is so much fun to have you here.
Well, thank you.
Now, you're a fellow Chautauquan. Have you been to Chautauqua a lot?
28 times in a row.
Good for you. Good for you.
I love it here. But I heard about it much sooner than that, much earlier than that, I should say. My husband was one who didn't want to be in one place. He loved to travel throughout the world.
Right.
And we did a lot of traveling until about 8 years before he passed away. He wasn't doing so well. I said, how about Chautauqua now? And he said, okay. So he died in 1992, and 8 years before I started coming, and that's the story.
Now, your accent's not a normal United States accent. Where are you from?
I was born in Berlin,
Really?
and after Crystal Night, and 4 weeks before the war broke out, I said, I'm not staying here. I was 17. And there were many German Jews who considered being German and then German, oh yeah, they happened to be Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
My father was one of them. And when I said, I'm not staying here, he said, what's good enough for the parents is good enough for the children. I said, not for this one. How I ever had the guts, I will never know.
Yeah.
Because looking back, I don't think I would have it today.
Right.
So I found myself foster parents in England, and with $5 in my pocket on August 2nd, I left. And I think one of the reasons Marianne lives in Westchester, she said, why don't you take the train? If I have to, I have to, but I still hate train station. I've been trying to think why. And I think it is because I still see my mother crying
Right.
when she said goodbye. Having said that, I was fortunate enough to find my parents alive after the war.
Mm.
And I was in England. I had a job that paid enough for my furnished room and my food, but for nothing else. So how was I going to get to Berlin to actually find them? And then I heard of the American War Department who wanted bilingual people for a year to work in Germany. I passed the test. I started off in censorship. And after that, after a short while, I found myself a job at the Nuremberg Trial as a translator.
Tell me about Berlin. When you came back to there and you didn't know quite the status of your mom and dad, how'd you find that out?
I went to the Red Cross. I went to the Jewish community organization, and I tried to find the pastor. There was a very famous pastor by the name of Niemöller,
Yes.
and his partner was Pastor Brandt, and he found my parents underground, and after 2.5 years he gave them false identification papers. It was the first time they saw daylight. And I got in touch with him, and he found them for me, and that's how I came to Berlin.
Did you meet Niemöller?
No,
Okay.
no.
But I know you had that
Yeah.
great job. Wow. And what was the reunion like?
Funny question. Typically reserved and typically German, sort of, hi. And I put my arms around my mom and my dad, and they did that too, but it's a very reserved family, and I think that was the case of many Europeans.
Yeah. Then you learned about a job in was this the Americans looking for a bilingual?
American War Department.
Okay.
You know, I had to pass the test in England. I passed it, and from there I was sent to Munich and worked in censorship for a short while until I found them. And then I transferred to Nuremberg. And after a while, it was the day before Goebbels committed suicide. No, Goering.
Well, this was Goebbels, of course, committed suicide prior to the tribunal.
Okay, so it's Goering, right. And I stood by the open window looking down to the green down below, and the telephones went off like crazy. Get that girl away from the window. So I nearly lost my job over that one. And actually the next day he committed suicide.
Yeah.
I think you know how he committed suicide, don't you?
Cyanide pill, and
Right.
they suspect Tex Wheelis.
Yeah.
So give me a timetable here. When you did the censorship, what were you censoring? Mail?
Documents.
Documents?
Right, no, the censorship mail, you're right. And some documents. And that was in Munich.
Then you get the call to go to Nuremberg. About what timetable was that? What time period?
I left for Munich in June of 1945. I was there for about, I would say, 3-4 months. And then I got the permission to go to Nuremberg.
So you were at Nuremberg right at almost the beginning of the trial.
Yes,
Because it started in November of
Yes.
1945.
yes.
And what was your assignment at Nuremberg?
Translating, not interpreting, translating papers.
Were you translating papers for, there was a section where the German defense attorneys wanted documents, available.
Right.
Were you part of that?
Yes.
And on a normal day, what would happen? They'd give you documents that are in German and you translate them to English?
And we were allowed to be in court.
Ah. Did you ever,
Right.
were you ever there with the people, Barrett, Roger Barrett, does that name ring a bell? He was the head of the documentation division,
Probably.
and he was occasionally there in court to give the prosecutors the documents.
Probably, yes.
So you went to court.
Yes.
So you walk in for the very first time, you're German, and you see on the dock, the individuals, and you see Goering, and there's Hess,
Right.
and Ribbentrop.
Which was the one that was in prison in Holland for so long?
That was England, that was Rudolf Hess.
Rudolf Hess, right.
So you walk in that courtroom and you see them.
Yes.
What's your reaction?
Reaction is that all through my life, I took whatever happened and swallowed it and lived with it. And I think that's how I managed to. The reaction was they should all have gone and been executed. What I found very, not worried, but what I found very strange and uncomfortable is that we had telephone calls from 13 and 14-year-old boys and girls. We want to be the one who kills them. Is that a German sort of nature, or is it that they have gone through so much? I don't know. I think it was more of a sensation than anything else, but that's my personal guess.
Did you know, had you read much about the individuals that you had seen on the dock? I mean, as you were in England, the newspapers that would come out, were there pictures of Goering and Hess and Ribbentrop? Were there that news articles that you were interested about?
If they were, I don't think I did. I don't think I could have afforded to buy the newspaper to begin with. And secondly, I wanted to get away from it all.
Right.
I mentioned to you that I found myself foster parents. They had 2 children of their own, and 2 children they, quote, borrowed from a couple where he was stationed in Kenya, and they couldn't take the family. And I remember there was only 4 weeks before the war broke out, and I remember that the mother of the other 2 children came to visit one afternoon, and she gave me a tip. And that was one of the last letters that came to my parents, where I said, I got a tip of £5 today. I got no money.
Right.
And my father wrote back, you should be ashamed of yourself to accept the tip. So,
Very German.
yes, very German.
What did your mother and dad do
My dad owned a bank
Okay.
and lost it, of course, the bank crashed 1929 and in 1933, Hitler didn't permit Jews to have a bank.
Right.
And I was talking to a gentleman last night who was, I've become very frugal. Maybe I always was, maybe it's circumstances. Mrs. Pievik often laughs about me. Don't be so frugal with yourself. Well, I can't help myself because I remember 7 years old, and I hate to admit it, a cook, a maid, a house, somebody who just catered to my mom, a chauffeur, a washerwoman, and a nanny. And came 1929, and that was it, within 24 hours. And my mom stood in the kitchen. She had never cooked in her life. And she said, with tears running down, "Can I go to your piggy bank and take out what's in there so we can eat lunch?" And with our present situation, this has all come back to me.
Yeah.
Whatever the case may be.
So your family was struck hard by the banking recession, and then, which was 29, and then of course worked its way into the early 30s. At the same time, that also sort of led to the rise of the National Socialist Party.
Absolutely.
And what did your mom and dad think as that party, that it was very popular party, kept rising? Was Hitler a common conversation politically at that early ages? This would be about 1932, 31, 32.
Was he politically?
Yeah, your dad, was he politically interested at all in what was going on?
No.
In the presidential race with?
Not that I remember. Then don't forget, I was born in 22. That wasn't sort of thing that was discussed when young ones were at home, right? And in the room.
Well, I'm just curious about that. Because of course, we have an image now of Hitler when the war started and all the atrocities that occurred. Yet, during that early days, as he was, working against and then with Hindenburg, there was this sort of feeling of popularity rise,
Oh yes, there was, and that was probably due to the fact that so many people were unemployed and the economic situation was anything but desirable.
Right.
And I don't think if that hadn't been the case, then he wouldn't have made it as far as he did.
Do you remember watching any of the rallies or any of the youth rallies? Were you?
I was we had to be part of it in the beginning.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
I went to a big school, and if there were marches, we had to go with them.
Right.
And they also had the school had a summer house, and of course Jews weren't allowed to go anymore. I was 15 and I got a bad case of dysentery, which by the time after 3 months when I could have gone back to school, Jews were no longer allowed in school. So I didn't go to a different school. I transferred to a language and business school until I left.
Were you ever in a situation where you saw the top leaders of the Nazi Party?
Oh yeah. Oh yes.
Hitler? Did you ever
Yeah.
see it? Oh really?
Oh yeah.
What was the enthusiasm level? I mean, I suppose when he showed up, as you saw in the newsreels, there was a lot of.
Absolutely. I also remember the 1936 Olympics, right? When, what was the African American who went?
Jesse Owens.
Jesse Owens came, and it really caused, I think he was not allowed to finally go and participate, if I remember correctly. Don't forget, at night you don't remember half the things anymore, but I do remember that I was there, and Jesse Owens was not allowed to run. Yes, I saw Hitler very often because my grandparents had an apartment where they marched by quite often. So, and when I was there, I stood by the window and watched.
Sure. And I think anybody would. It seemed like quite a spectacle.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Were you at all encouraged to give the salute? As a young child, I mean, it's sort of difficult. I mean,
You bring back to my memory the fact that we had a teacher for Latin and geography. He married an 18-year-old from the school who was Jewish. And he was the biggest anti-Semite on the outside that you could possibly imagine. He was the only one that demanded that when he came in, we had to stand up and say Heil Hitler. When I came to the United States, I guess I've never forgotten that. I looked in the telephone book in Manhattan and found his name. And it's the only anonymous letter I ever wrote saying I was a student of his and I hope to God that the Americans would not give him a permission to teach. Which they did.
Yeah.
And funnily, life can be very funny. I do a lot of volunteer work, and I was volunteering in the hospital, and who was I introduced to? Mrs. Menkemeyer. He was dead by then.
yeah.
And that was difficult for me to take.
Yeah.
I said hello and goodbye, and that was it.
Right. When, wow, of that group of leaders, I mean, some of them were more rabid than others.
Like Goebbels.
Yeah. Did you ever go to a speech where he was doing his propaganda presentation?
No.
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 Just on radio, you'd hear that? Goebbels, you'd hear his rabble.
Right. Yes.
You just principally radio addresses?
Yes. And we did listen to various of them. And for the Crystal Night, I remember we were told that my father would be picked up through the grapevine. And my mom tried to convince my dad to go into hiding. Mm-hmm. He said, "It's my Germany. I'm not going anywhere." Right. She begged him and she begged him, and finally she convinced him. He went for one night to her podiatrist outside of the immediate city. They did come, and my mom handled it beautifully. They sat there and said, "Where's Dr. Gumpel?" "I don't know. My husband went out this morning. I have no idea. I don't know when he's coming back." "Oh. On the piano you have a photo. Who's that?" "That's my dad." And the man turned around and said, "And his name was Fabian Rehfeld, wasn't it?" "Yes, it was. He was the first violinist in the Emperor's Court." And obviously the men knew him. With that they got up and they said, "We'll try not to come back, but we can't promise it." And in the afternoon, 2 others came. My dad wasn't home. And that was the end of the story. Excuse me. And that is when I said, "Thank you very much." Not me.
Right. Now, did you have siblings?
No.
So,
No.
Then you decided at that time that England was the next spot for you. And did you have to get a visa or to leave Germany at that time?
I had not a visa, but I had some card which I think I donated to the, which museum? To the Berlin Museum.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said, we were allowed to take out $5. And I had 2 ounces of silver. And so I took a little silver dish, my mom's, and I think a spoon, a fork, and a knife. And we had to present it on a form, like 2 pencils, 1/4 of a pound of absorbent cotton, etc., etc. And I made a spelling mistake. And the man said, "Can't spell, can't take." And I looked at my dad. I thought he was going to help me. And he said, "You're the one who wants to emigrate. I'm not helping you."
Okay.
So it stayed there.
Yeah.
It was interesting for me to come back to Berlin, and I met my Latin teacher. My mom said, your Latin teacher lives across the street. He was married to a Jewish woman. They had one child, and they sent that child out to Guatemala where her sister lived. I think she was a grown-up child, like in her late teens.
Mm-hmm.
And when the war was finished and they thought they'd get their child back, she had committed suicide. She couldn't take it. So I tried my very best. You can't replace anybody's daughter, but I tried my best to do something as much as I could for them. And one day my dad apparently went to Dr. Schaefer and said, there's one thing my daughter wants more than anything, and that is to go to college. Can you help? And he said, I'll think about it. And he called me the next morning and he said, I need you to know your dad came to me and asked about college, and of course I could help you, but I can't see that I'm instrumental to bringing you back to Germany.
Mm-hmm.
That was the end of the story. The only thing in my life that I regret not having gone to college.
Right. Right. With your bilingual background, though, you obviously, we found ourselves to Nuremberg. You're in the documentation center, the beginning of the trial. What was your sense being there as to whether this was this a moment in history or was this a job for you?
Both.
Mm-hmm.
It was, I think, more a moment of history because my only aim was, it wasn't a matter of a job, how do I get to Berlin? Whatever way.
Mm-hmm.
And I finally did something I never done before or since. Whenever I saw somebody who I thought might be important, I started crying walking past. Eventually it did the trick.
Yeah, that's great. When you went to the trials, do you remember anything about the trial or the courtroom, like Justice Jackson? Did that mean anything to you as the chief prosecutor when you sat there? Is there any image of him?
As a total picture of the whole room, yes.
Yeah.
Because he was a good guy, they were the bad guys.
Yeah, yeah. What was your, when you went into the trials and watched the proceedings, most people came back, have told us that it was pretty boring. Did you find it interesting?
Pretty boring.
Yeah. A lot of documents, a lot of documents, a lot of documents. Your documents, you know, that
Right.
did you translate them?
Right.
Did the attorneys ever come and talk to you about your job of doing the translations at all?
Not really. The only time, and I think I mentioned this before, that I stood by the open window
Yeah.
one day. I think I mentioned this before, and all hell broke loose. But outside of that, no, not really.
Now, when you were in that open window, what were you looking at?
Going down in the park, in the little garden, whatever, back and forth. And I don't know who was with him, certainly not his wife. And then the next day, that was the end of the story.
So the Goering would have been on that path area by the prison, walking around probably.
Right.
So you snuck a look, huh?
I snuck a look.
Oh.
Right.
Somebody marked this down. Okay. When he died, what was the buzz in the courthouse? Because he committed suicide, of course, but were you...
And how he committed suicide, that he had that vial available to him.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe a little bit of relief.
Right.
It's difficult to say when you're 90 what you felt at 21,
Right.
or whatever I was. Yeah.
So you were literally at the Nuremberg trial during the entire the Jackson's time period from
Yes.
November of 45 through October of 46.
No,
No?
because from I went over there in June of 45. I went to, that was to Munich. I went to Nuremberg around November, shortly after it started. And about, I would say, 3 months later,
Okay.
I got permission to go to Berlin.
Gotcha. And what'd you do at Berlin?
Censorship.
Okay. Does the name Arnold Joseph mean anything to you? He was at
Yes.
Nuremberg for censorship, but also he was...
Yes, it does. Hmm.
Because he still lives in Ohio.
Oh,
And I'll mention your name, and who knows, you may remember some memory.
there's so many people.
Was it a lot of people that you worked with, do you recall, in your area of the documentation center?
Not that many.
Yeah.
I met one who lectured at the New School. I regularly took courses in the evenings, and I'm trying to think whether that was, I can't remember his name, but he was very well known.
As an attorney?
Yes.
Ben Ferencz? Ben Ferencz?
I know, I heard that name. No,
No.
that wasn't him. Was there somebody with a K?
King. Henry King?
Could be.
Yeah. They've all been here. Yeah.
Terrific. You did a terrific job of building this up. I'm looking forward to seeing the rest of it.
Well, yeah, they're just the tip of the iceberg here. Did you keep anything from the trial? Did you keep any documents? Did you sort of as souvenirs?
I think whatever I kept, I gave to the museum
In Berlin?
in New York and in Berlin.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks to Mrs. Fiebig, I was on my own when my husband died for 12 years, and thanks to Mrs. Fiebig, I met a wonderful gentleman who was an artist, and it's one of the pieces, but basically he did a lot of big things for government offices and other big places, and they sent a curator from the Berlin Museum to interview him in America, and they had a certain amount of money that they could spend on bringing back a piece of art. And the woman fell in love with two pieces, but didn't have enough money, so I figured, okay, I made a donation to the museum so that she could take back, with the idea that possibly this would be on permanent. It's a gorgeous menorah, that it would possibly be available to everybody to see rather than being in one family and being in hiding. Had I known what they did with it, which it's in a drawer somewhere, I would never have done this.
Right. As you look back at when you were doing the translating of the documents, was there some document or two that you recall saying, oh my God, I can't believe what I've just read?
There probably were, whether I can... There was one that was funny, which was... It might come to me. If it does, I'll let you know. Something about censorship. But go on, and if it comes to me, I'll come back to it.
Now, your offices were in the Palace of Justice, and how was it laid out? Was there a kind of entryway where the judge or the lawyers would come in and make a request?
The people who were the guilty ones were sitting on that side.
Right.
The interpreter and prosecutor were across from there, and there were more people sitting here, and there were benches for people who, like myself, or visitors who were allowed to come in.
Did you ever wish that you had the ability to be a translator, in the courtroom?
No, I never thought about that.
Yeah.
Not at all.
You could put these things on and you could be talking.
Yeah, that's right.
What did you guys do for social life? When the day was done, you went back. Where did you stay, by the way? Did they have dormitories or?
No.
I know that Farmer
No.
Castle was a place where a lot of people stayed.
Yeah. But were there dormitories?
Yeah.
Maybe I did.
Yeah.
Sorry, I
Right.
blank out.
But I don't know.
From there, when I went to Berlin, I got my own apartment.
Right. But at Nuremberg, did you, your fellow workers, did you guys go out? What'd you do at nights?
Went out to have some food or go to... There wasn't all that much doing at that time,
Mm-hmm.
because I think Nuremberg, if I remember correctly, was also quite damaged. Little did I know that my husband, who was an attorney, who I didn't know, was not far from there and was an interpreter for the judge in the other courts.
Really? Wow. Were the soldiers interested in all you good-looking women?
Yeah, we did go out with soldiers.
Other people have said that. I mean, yeah, you know, this is great. So, normal.
Yeah.
Did you guys, as you were doing the documents, and did you follow the trial, the progress of the trial? Were you reading the magazines, Stars and Stripes, or
Little bit,
a bit?
but not that much.
So sort of come in and do the work. And how would it actually work? Would they physically give you a German document, and then would you have to write it out, or how would you type it?
Yes. I think we wrote it out.
Wrote it out?
Yeah.
In English?
Mm-hmm.
And was there anybody checking your work? Was there a supervisor?
Yes. That's why I want to recall this funny saying that somebody found in that. As I said, if I come back to it, I'll let you know.
When you finally read the verdicts of the Nuremberg trial and saw what had happened, that some had been found, 18 had been found guilty, some to be hanged, did you have any reaction as being German, being Jewish? Did you have a reaction as to the final verdict of Nuremberg?
I was glad for everybody who was done away with. I was very shocked, and that's why it still came to mind that 13 and 14-year-olds rang up to say they want to be the one who put an end to the life of Göring or any of the others. What must a child feel like? Mm-hmm. And I would have loved to have known what was their background to create that. Was it just sensationalism? Was it that their family suffered? My best girlfriend was Christian, and I remember she met my mom in the street and she tried to say hello to her, but of course she was very careful. I think, what she did is when Liesl was, 13 or 14, and she was forced to go to the BDM, the group of German girls. The mother dressed her up. Pardon? Right. The mother dressed her up in high heels, made up her face to the hilt, put her in a fur coat, and sent her to the meeting in the afternoon. She was sent home as unwanted. Her father, who had a very big position in a large company, nearly lost his job.
You said it's been taking you a while to kind of talk about these things.
Yes.
Why?
Because it was a rough time to go and be all on your own. When I came to England, I had, as I told you, I looked after 4 children. I never got a penny. Until the second week I said, could I have some money to buy a ticket? It was outside of London, to go the afternoon and see something in London. And from that day on, I think I got the equivalent of $5 a week. So at least I could buy myself, have my shoes sold or whatever it was. That day and age wasn't that expensive. But, and from there I went to friends of my mother's. In fact, I remember that for some reason or other, it's the only time in my life that I ever borrowed money, and I borrowed like $20 from a friend of my mom's. And after 6 months I had the money together and went, and he said, I can't believe this. I gave money to 21 girls. You're the only one who paid back.
So here you are today at Chautauqua Institution. Have you met similar folks who had somewhat of your experience at Chautauqua?
Well, in the Jewish Not really, but they did have me talk one evening on Friday night or Saturday morning, whenever it was, about the experience, and I had asked, as I said, the gentleman who was in the same situation, except that he didn't work at Nuremberg, and they asked both of us to speak, but there was nobody there that I recall who had a similar experience. There may have been. And I'm not the kind of person who necessarily goes and blurts out whatever.
Right. What's the question I should be asking her?
We went to school together for a very short time, and then we lost touch for many, many years, right?
Is there a story she should be telling me here?
I can't think of anything. I didn't go to Nuremberg.
Well, what she did there at Nuremberg, and you'll see a picture, and I hope that we get a picture of you by the picture of the translators in the documentation room with papers all over the place. I mean, it's just spread out. So you might be in that picture.
Who knows?
Who knows? Is that how your workroom looked like? Was it you'd be writing, and if you made a mistake, you threw it over the...
Right. What I do remember is when I came to Berlin, and then again for censorship, and my mom and dad, after I found them, they sent them meals with a chauffeur every lunchtime. And as you may have found out, my dad was not the easiest man to cope with. And one fine day he went to the head of the whole thing and said, I don't want to repeat the word, what he called the meal, you can keep for yourself. Within 10 minutes, the 4,000 people that were stationed around there came to me. Said, do you know what your dad did? I was ready to quit and go back to England. I had gotten him a job, seeing that he knew some English, and he didn't get paid for it, but he worked in the office. Would you believe that from that day on, they sent a chauffeur with a meal each day to my parents? He's the one who won, and I'm the one who lost.
That's a cute story. Do you remember who the boss was? Remember his name?
I think I could look it up at home. I think I may have something, but offhand, no.
Yeah. This has been great. What a memory.
How come that you are so interested in this whole matter as a lawyer?
Well, Robert Jackson was a lawyer. Robert Jackson was from here, Jamestown, and of course Robert Jackson being the chief prosecutor at Nuremberg, having a chance to meet anybody like she who was there. And it's your one step of removal. That's as close as you can get. So over the last 11, 12 years, we've had people like you, prosecutors, translators, mail censors, doctors, anybody who had anything to do with the Nuremberg process, because it helps fill in a mosaic. It was a big trial.
That shouldn't be lost.
Yeah, and it shouldn't be lost. I mean, fundamentally, that's why we're doing what we're doing. You're part of the oral history here. And what was your maiden name?
Gumpel, Gumpel, was a big bank in Hanover. And when my dad was, I think, 18 or 20, he moved from Hanover to Berlin. And then he started a branch of that bank in Berlin.
So if we looked up the roster of people who worked at Nuremberg during that time period, what would your name have been then?
Gumpel, Steffi Gumpel.
Okay, we'll look it up.
Okay.
Because we have that someplace. In fact, Jen's probably got it. Is she here making notes? Jen could look it up, because somewhere in that archive we have the roster. And I'll stay in touch, Steffi, with, I'll call Arnold Joseph, and just for the slight chance that he might remember.
Yeah. I doubt it, because I was only a very little wheel.
I don't know.
But you never know. I'm trying to think. I met the other gentleman at lectures, what his name was.
Ed Chautauqua at the Jewish house?
No. In New York with some lectures I took, and he was there, and I'll try and see whether I have anything of the kind. If so, I'll let you know.
That's wonderful.
Okay?
I am so thrilled, and I'm glad we could pause for a second and get the story. I'm anxious
Second. Well, I'm very grateful. I thank you very much. As I said, it took me a while because I really tried to stay away from anything that was Hitler, one form or another. Thank you very much.
That's great. All right.
Blame him for it.
Sid Lyons, yes, we call him a lot of things. He's a good guy.